All right, evening. So welcome everybody. Thanks for attending. This is a really important topic and we're really excited to have some really engaging and exciting discussion about wellness just in general around EMS, but really this is focused on coping strategies, storytelling. We're going to all share parts of our stories and turning points for us. So a few announcements really quickly. Next month's EMS webinar is actually going to be improving clinical documentation for EMS. So that's going to be taught by myself. Would love for you guys to join me. I'll try to make it not so dry. And then I will be recording that one as well and putting it up for grabs. So if you are starting a new employee orientation program or doing anything of that nature, you are welcome to that recording to teach some of your clinical documentation. CEs will be provided. Our simulated virtual training will begin again in the fall. We are continuing to collaborate with Michigan State University. So if you really love those courses or you didn't get a chance to check them out, you're definitely welcome to those. More to come on that. Our workshops, we have 2 exciting workshops coming. We are looking at what COVID is going to do and what the pandemic is going to do, but we have Bob Page to come in and teach 12 lead EKGs, and we have Tim Nowak that's going to come in and do rural data management. So quality reporting for rural providers. He has some great strategies. So more to come there. Registration is not open. It is not posted. I'm kind of eagerly waiting to see what's going to happen. The capacity for the room is 75 folks. And as you know, with social distancing, that would change tremendously. So we're looking at that. And then our Coveted EMS Leadership Academy, we just had a bunch of folks go through and graduate. Congratulations, Betsy Mcdavid. She is one of the graduates. Yay. Our next academy is going to be, it's going to begin in October and in April of 2022. And it's going to be in beautiful Marquette. Registration coming soon. So thank you, everybody. The first thing that I want to just take a moment to do is thank each of our panelists. Everybody has taken time out of their night and their busy schedules to come and share their stories and share their turning points. And we really, really appreciate all of you. So thank you so much for helping us put this together. And then the other thing is I want to say thank you to the Stay Well program. Thank you for being on tonight, Matt. We really appreciate it. Yeah, so, all right, well, I'm going to get started. Emily and I are going to do an introduction. So my introduction is just going to start out with a story. So I'm going to start with a few things that have kind of affected me. And to be a little bit vulnerable and authentic, I'm really uncomfortable. I'm not really good about talking about this stuff myself. And when I do go to talk about it, I always aspire, but kind of get tripped up a little bit. So bear with me. But the first story that I wanted to share with you is, I call it the blind leading the blind in a way. And what I mean by that is, I was on shift one day. It was early in the morning. I just woke up. I was actually going to come off. I was the supervisor in that area. I was drinking my coffee, and our crew came in for crew change, and they were telling a story, and they were telling me about how they went on a drug overdose. And I won't give too many details because the details don't matter, but it was a really, really awful call. It was a tragedy. It was a young mother. The baby was in the crib in the room, and they started explaining these details, and I'm drinking my coffee. My heart rate started to go up because his story and his call, the way he was describing it, was similar to a call that I had recently encountered. And, you know, I've always prided myself on our supervisors being our middle leaders, right? The people that really touch our employees and are able to help our employees along and mentor them. And I'm really great in the truck about training and field training, and really great about trying to get people motivated and engaged, but I couldn't do it. And I kind of copped out. So I just basically put my coffee down and said, hey, I've got some scheduling stuff to do before I go. And I ended up just abruptly ending that conversation. And after that, I felt really guilty, but it was one of those feelings of, wow, I don't think I've really dealt with my stuff if I'm feeling that way. And also, I felt like a poor leader, like I wasn't leading well because I wasn't able to give that employee what he needed. So it was almost like the blind leading the blind. Like, how am I going to help you if I haven't helped myself first? And so for me, that was kind kind of a turning point for me where I started to realize like, yeah, I think I have some things going on with me that I need to look inward and address. So really quickly, the other thing I wanted to bring up is during my career, one of the things that, and I'm sure everybody on the panel can identify with this, is we're always asked, hey, what's the worst thing you've ever seen? Or, hey, what's the craziest call you've ever been on? And I've noticed a stark difference. So recently, I have progressed into less hours on the road, and I've actually had a break. I've been off the ambulance for what, 3 months now, something like that. But when I was in the mix and I was asked that question versus when I'm a little bit more distance and I've had some time to heal, I noticed that that question would also make my heart rate up. And I would start to have flashbacks of calls that I had recently encountered or calls that I was hanging on to. And it's really hard to say, hey, I really don't want to talk about that. But that's in a nutshell what a lot of us will say. Some of us will share. But for me, it was a question that really brought up some stuff for me. And so I think looking inward and looking at where we're at with our journey and how we're coping, we all cope differently. So for me, those were two stories that I just wanted to briefly share with you. Maybe someone in the audience can identify with some of that. Those are some of the things that I've noticed. So I'm going to segue into why we're here tonight. So as a panel, our why is going to vary a little bit. Everybody's kind of got a different take on why they're here, but we're really, we do have some commonality in the sense that we're here to destigmatize not talking about things and not being open about it. So we really want to hammer that home with our audience, is that it's okay to talk about these things. It's okay to bring it up and to just try to normalize these conversations. And it's okay to ask for help if you need it. So I'm going to talk about in just a few minutes, moral injury, what PTSD is, and some of the signs and symptoms. And if you're having some of these symptoms, it's okay to address them. So we really want to convey that taking care of yourself mentally and physically is really important. And my next segue is into self-care. And self-care is really important for us. Another just short thing that I wanted to share with you is recently I was reading an obituary from a company about an employee, and the obituary went on and on about how this employee continued to pick up shifts and how they were always there and they were helping with the staffing crisis. And Bob would pick up 48 hours in a row and we really appreciate him. But there was nothing in the obituary beyond that. And I thought, wow, that's really strange. Like someone just passed away and you wrote about how they worked really hard, and that was the culture. So to bring this bigger picture to light, one of the things that culturally I think that we really pride ourselves on is always being the caregiver, always being the fixer, always being there, always being on. And we need to start looking at that, I think more broadly. I'm not just going to put it on agencies, but as an industry, as a culture, are we rewarding people for taking a vacation? And are we rewarding them for talking about what's going on with them? My story that I just started with, the supervisor can't have a conversation with you about something that's bothering you because that supervisor is also bothered. So it's a really interesting dynamic that we have, but I share that with you because self-care is so important. And I really hope that we can bring that to the table as an industry and start rewarding each other for doing self-care. Take the vacation, don't pick up the overtime if you don't have to, spend time with your family, do the things that you need to do to take care of you, rest, exercise, all of those good things. So moral injury, what is moral injury? So the definition I'm going to read to you is, it's a psychological, behavioral, social, and spiritual distress experienced by individuals who are performing or exposed to actions that contradict their moral values. So another way to break this down is it's associated with actions that evoke feelings of guilt or shame. How many times have you experienced some guilt or some shame when in the work environment, on the job, or maybe outside of the work environment? Also described as moral injury, or at least a part of it, is situations in which another's actions violate an individual's value system, resulting in feelings of betrayal. How many times have you felt betrayed in some way, shape, or form? So examples would be loss of a vulnerable person, perceived preventable deaths due to lack of resources, staffing, that should hit home for some of us, issuing directions that result in the death of another person. So this is in a nutshell what moral injury is. And what they say about moral injury is that when you have a moral injury, if it goes unaddressed, if it's not addressed and dealt with, it can compile and turn into post-traumatic stress disorder. So we're going to talk about that in a minute. But before I go into PTSD, what are some of the symptoms of moral injury? So moral injury symptoms: guilt, shame, anger. We talked about guilt and shame. Anger, a sense of betrayal. We just mentioned that. Distrust and negative self-talk. What are some of the psychological and behavioral changes that may be included? Self-isolation, hypervigilance, avoidance, intrusive memories, difficulty concentrating, compulsive behaviors, self-harming behaviors, and social problems. So these can all be attributed to or connected to moral injury. So as I said, if moral injury continues and it goes unaddressed, we can then get ourselves into post-traumatic stress disorder. So what's PTSD? It's a psychological reaction occurring after experiencing a highly stressful event that is characterized by depression, anxiety, flashbacks, recurrent nightmares, and an avoidance or reminders of the event. So if you take the two and you put them together, they overlap quite a bit, but PTSD is almost like the end result of having injuries, being injured as a person and not addressing them, depression, anxiety, so on and so forth. So symptoms are similar to PTSD: intrusive memories, avoidance, negative thinking and or mood, changes in physical and emotional reactions. So obviously intrusive memories can vary depending on who and what. Avoidance can vary. Maybe you're avoiding driving by a scene that you were on. Maybe you're avoiding the person you did the call with. Negative thinking and mood could involve anxiety, depression, irritability, all of those things. And then changes in physical and emotional reactions can also be like overreacting to things, constantly seeing the glass half full. It can man itself in different ways for different people. So just really quickly, I want to share some research statistics that I found in just doing just a deep dive into some of the literature that's out there. So lifetime risk for someone, a normal adult in the US, not associated with first response, lifetime risk of developing PTSD, statistically 3.5%. Meanwhile, you've got an 85% of first responders surveyed, so this was by the University of Phoenix, having experienced symptoms related to mental health issues. So, and the mental health issues that they outlined were PTSD and also anxiety and depression. So they lumped it all together. 1/3 received a formal diagnosis of a mental health disorder. 84% of first responders surveyed said they experienced a traumatic event on the job, which I guess isn't that surprising, but still to hear that statistic, I mean, it's quite high. 69% said mental health services are seldom or never used at their organization. I wonder why. And 2 out of 5 first responders reported perceived repercussions for asking for help. So there was lots of literature after that I didn't include because I didn't want to talk forever tonight, but there were a lot of reasons for that. Fear that they would lose their job, a stigma associated with talking, maybe they were shamed at some point. There were a lot of reasons why people didn't want to talk about it. So what can we do? Well, the first thing is talk about it. Talk about stories, talk about our turning points, talk about our coping strategies, open the conversation, normalize it, and just keep talking about it. And the other thing we could do is really start looking at the work environment and making our work environments intentional to create mental and physical health for everyone. So that's my introduction. My co-host, Emily Burquist, is up next. So Emily, will you take the floor? Thank you.
Sure, thanks, Andrea. And thanks for having us and putting this together. I have to take a minute to say this has been her, I think, passion project for a while. This webinar has been a long time coming. So thanks for kind of wrangling us all and talking people into talking. And it's going to be difficult. My first part is the easy part of my conversation. It gets a little bit more difficult later. Somebody messaged me before the webinar and said something about tonight, and I was like, this is the most terrifying webinar I've done.
Sure.
And I do a lot of talking and writing and things like that. So I'll start because I know that Andrea reminded me earlier that we do need to introduce ourselves because there's a familiarity in this group, and we all know each other. So for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Emily Bergquist. I am the MCA coordinator for the state office. I am here in that role, but I want to be clear on the fact that I am in that role because EMS is my mission. It is the great love of my life. I worked full-time on the road for 17 years as a paramedic. Before coming into the state office, I left engineering to become a paramedic because I fell in love with it. So EMS is my thing, and I don't have any interest of doing anything else. And so I've been fortunate enough to have this opportunity to work at a statewide level and really work on supporting our systems in the way that I really believe that it should. And it's not perfect, but we're really, really trying. So then the question of what Andrea had said is why are we here, and why am I here having this conversation and kind of putting myself out there? When we had the inception of the EMS safety subcommittee, if you don't know that exists, it is a thing. I call that like the best ulcer I ever gave myself. It is a group of people from across the state, and we get together and talk about EMS safety issues and try to come up with tools and best practices to offset some of them. One of the things that came up time and time again was behavioral health issues, and how do we support our first responders, and how do we keep this as part of recruitment and retention, but as just a part of supporting the people that are doing so much good work. You know, what are our alternatives here? And so I've done so much reading and writing about this. If you read the Wednesday updates, you know this comes up pretty regularly in the things that I write about, the books that we've been reading. And it is not something that we do a very good job of supporting or talking about. So I think that that's part of why I'm here. And I want everyone to understand that how you cope, and you'll hear this as we talk through the different stories, how you cope with what is going on, it's different. Like how you do things, it's different. How I deal with it is going to be different. The things that affect me are going to be different based on my perspective and my frame of reference. Same thing for everyone on this panel. So there is no like normal response to have seeing the things that you will see at some point in time if you stay in this career. And there's no one should say it's not okay for you to feel one way. It's not okay for you to react in any particular way. Obviously, we can't do self-destructive behaviors, or we shouldn't. But if something is affecting you, you shouldn't let the fact that it's not affecting someone else sway you from trying to help or trying to seek assistance or trying to talk about it, because all of our baggage or biases, those are all different. You know, where I came from versus where Ryan came from, it's totally different. The things that I can handle better might be things that Ryan can't handle as well. And that's kind of the great part about having the teams that we do in EMS. So I want everybody to understand that, like, whatever it is that you're going through, it's okay to not be okay. This is the decreased stigma of what is going on in our general EMS world that we live in. For so long, it was, go about what your business, go to your business. You're strong enough, you're good enough, you're smart enough, you've been through enough that this shouldn't affect you. Keep going, keep going, keep going, right? That is what we have all done for a really long time, until all of a sudden things are really, really bad. And when you look retroactively, you probably saw it coming a while back. Right? Like, I don't sleep very well. I still don't sleep very well to this very day. I'm not a good sleeper. And I always attributed it to, I work 24-hour shifts, so I'm a really, really light sleeper. And that you just attribute it to something. And like, that's okay. It's okay that I don't sleep very well. It's not okay that you can't sleep when you're not on duty. like that is something that you need to have in order to rest your physical body, but also your soul in between all of the other terrible things that you're expected to do. So realize that there is something different for everyone, that everyone has some sort of a struggle. And I think that it's important to know that there's a difference between not having a struggle and burying an issue. And this is what I'm going to say is, some people on the surface, you're saying that look at them, like, why does this not affect them at all? They seem to be doing just fine. And they're really just burying it or repressing it or getting rid of it or whatever. And that only lasts for so long. Eventually, that's going to come back. Whether it's in a week, it's on a call that's similar, it's when your employee comes and starts talking to you about a similar call when you're having coffee, whatever those things are, you think it was like, oh, I got over that, it's fine, I'm moving on with my life. And then that's not coping, that's burying. And so I think that our goal today is to increase the understanding, decrease the stigma, and help you understand, like, there are ways that you can go about coping, and you'll hear a whole wide range of things on that issue. So I know I didn't use as much time as Andrea had allotted for me in the introduction, but I'll save some more stuff for when it's my actual story. And I think that Aaron is first. Andrea, did you want to say anything before Aaron got started, or do you want to go straight to Aaron?
No, we can give Aaron the floor. Aaron, if you could tell the audience a little bit about yourself and share this incredible story. Thank you, Emily. That was really, really great.
All right. My name's Aaron. Hello. I was a paramedic in a pretty busy area for 10 years on the road and then a year in the hospital. I also did some fire service for a few years as a Jolly Valley. I'm currently a board certified perfusionist at a large hospital in Michigan. And my kind of story, I guess, is maybe a little different from some of the other panelists. I never have really had an issue with like one specific call getting in my head and like focusing on that. What I noticed was in my personal life off time that I would be partaking in either very risky behaviors or drinking quite a lot, and other times when I wasn't doing anything, just like sitting in front of the TV, chilling out. Like my whole body would just shake for no reason, and I'd just be sitting there like, what the hell is going on? And I think the issue that I had was, you work so much, you spend so much time in like a hyper alert state that when that became my body got used to that being normal. And so like when I would actually try to like just chill, it wouldn't feel right. So I found myself like, driving exceedingly fast. I had a motorcycle. I go rip around on the motorcycle just to get back to baseline. And so it caused some issues in my life outside of work. So I promised my wife, I said, okay, I'll go and talk to the employee health people. That's a sign in the break room. That's who you go to talk to if you have issues. So I go to U of M, I talk to the lady, and she's like asking me questions about stuff. And so I start telling her like, this is kind of what we deal with at work. And she starts crying. And so I'm sitting there and the lady that's supposed to be talking to me is crying. And I'm like, this is ridiculous. This isn't helping anything. And I would find like, if I talk about this stuff, it makes me feel anxious and uncomfortable. I just don't like it. I'd rather just not talk about it. But once, that was probably like 5 years into my career. And so my wife was pregnant with her first kid. And I just said to myself, like, this is not, I can't do this job for my whole career. This is not a viable career. I got to figure something out. So I went back to school. I worked nights full time, and I went to school part time year round. I got my bachelor's degree in physiology. I took a job at U of M just to get off the road, basically, because after 4 straight years of night shift plus school plus a new baby and then another new baby, I just had enough. So I took a new job, less hours, much better work environment. I started applying to grad school, and I got into grad school, and now I'm doing my new career as a perfusionist, and I haven't looked back, not once. EMS taught me a lot, but I made the decision that I'm doing this any longer is causing damage. I'm damaging myself. It's obvious. I shouldn't be shaking sitting on the couch. I shouldn't have to go rip around on a bike at 100+ miles an hour just to feel normal. So I ended up doing some research on my own after the employee health thing was such a disaster. And what I found helped me a lot was physical exercise. I still work in a pretty stressful job, so I still work out. I lift heavy weights, and if you lift heavy weights, it ups the production of cortisol, which is your stress hormone, and it also ups the enzymes that break that down. So when I have stress outside of or inside work or outside of work, my body's more used to dealing with the hormones that makes, and I just end up feeling a lot better. I got away from exercise in grad school, and I noticed I started having those same sort of feelings, those same kind of risk-taking behaviors, and so now I'm back working out, and I feel a lot better. So that's what works for me. I'm here because Andrea asked me to be here. No, normally I wouldn't talk about this to anybody except my wife, and even then, I really wouldn't find that much fun at all. So I just kind of deal with it myself, and I hope that if you guys are feeling that way, you don't have to be having flashbacks about a terrible call, in your car to be having like PTSD or any of this other stuff. It can manifest in other ways, and you got to deal with it. If you don't deal with it, it's just gonna get worse. And I got a lot of friends that are EMS and have gotten themselves in trouble with drugs or alcohol in the law because they haven't dealt with it. So deal with it somehow. That's my advice.
That was incredible. Thank you, Aaron. So Chrissy, I see you're lighting up over there. So feel free to chime in and ask any questions. It's an open floor, but I will introduce Chrissy Kuhl. And feel free to introduce yourself to the audience and don't let me interrupt you. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay. So one thing I just wanted to double back on is when Aaron said that about the exercise, I think that your physiology major may have been a leg up that the rest of us don't have, where like you got it, you understood what you needed to do and why you needed to do it, and it worked for you. I think maybe we should all have a little mini course in that.
Maybe we can have another webinar where Aaron teaches us about
right
picking things up and putting them down.
Yeah.
I'm in for it.
It's a really cheap and easy solution. Find something heavy and carry it around for a little bit. I'm telling you.
Excellent.
So my name's Chrissy. I worked for 20 years in a quite busy service area. It covered both city and rural, which was amazing. So you could do a tractor rollover in the morning and then a drive-by shooting in the afternoon to wrap out your day. You got a wide variety of things, and we were busy. I did 24s, I did high response unit. I spent a lot of time on the MICU. Also taught, and then I did some teaching of the specialties like PHTLS, ITLS, CPR, stuff like that. And then I moved into a supervisor role, and then ultimately did some QI/QA while I was with that agency. but my passion was the road. That was my comfort zone. That was my place. So what I want to talk about is what I call the slippery slope of resilience pride. So we all have this pride in our capacity to bounce back after a call, whether we compartmentalize or disassociate or whatever we do, whatever or however we do it. It's kind of our pride in our resilience. And that's really important because it lets us conduct the work that we need to do on the road, especially when you're busy. But it is a very slippery slope. And so I'm going to give you kind of an overview of where I started and a couple of points and where I ended, and then things that I didn't know at the time and how we kind of fixed it the best that we could. So when I started in this field, I was in my late 20s and I had a couple of kids. I was a loving mom, hugger, kisser, bedtime stories, like just real lovey. And I had really good relationships with my siblings and my parents, and I was just a close kind of person. So I want you to fast forward 10 years into my career. That's what I started. 10 years into my career, my son was involved in an accident that had a fatality. He wasn't injured, wasn't in his car. It was just a teenager ran a stop sign and the vehicle he was in hit them. And when it was the first time that my personal world and my clinical world collided. When I got to the hospital, I checked him out. I talked to him, made sure he was okay, but I didn't hug him. I did not hug him. And that was a red flag for me. I knew something wasn't right. I knew I had been changing, but I didn't know how. And I didn't really understand why I was in that place. But I was a good medic, especially, I could go boom, boom, boom from call to call to call and toe the line and carry everybody with me. But I was compartmentalizing, and I didn't really realize how much I was disassociating my person from my profession. And I began to say things like when I would introduce myself, it would start with I'm a medic, not I'm married or have kids. It started with I'm a medic. So fast forward another half a dozen years, and then I have the colossal collision of personal and clinical worlds. So I find myself in emergency department of a critical access hospital with my sister and my brother-in-law and my niece, and she has the flu, and she's going to get flown out to a bigger hospital, which was not, it's a big deal, but it wasn't a big deal because they fly everybody out. And if you're pediatrics, always get flown out. She had been feeling well. My sister didn't think she was acting right. And my brother-in-law, state trooper, my sister
You just got back from court.
had transitioned from law enforcement into the medical world. And so it was our team. I knew the flight team that was there. I'd worked with them several times. I knew the doctor. Something would happen, we would react. Something would happen, we would react. And I was still had that separation of clinical and personal. And then she died. And it was a colossal collision of my personal and my clinical world at that time. She ended up, it was a necrotizing pneumonia, which was a rare complication due to pneumonia. No one saw it coming. Everyone did everything, every med, every intervention, everything on spot. It was just a freight train coming around the corner that nobody could stop. So as soon as I cleared the hospital, I wasn't on duty, so I didn't clear the hospital. But as soon as I left, I did what any rational person would do. I called work and quit my job because my two worlds had collided and could not coexist. Fate had made it so that I could not separate the two anymore. So I quit. So I'm going to as I go back through this, I'll tell you there's some bright spots and some good interventions. Bright spot one, someone who didn't have the authority to tell me this, but still made it a mandate, said, well, okay, you can't quit until you go see somebody, and you can't come back until you go see somebody. And I'm like, so it sounds like I got to go see somebody. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but okay, bossy. The second bright spot was I had a team or a work family that stepped up and took care of things for me in a way that I will never be able to thank them back for. Two of them are on this call, Betsy and Emily, that basically saved my family at that moment. And then bright spot 3 is when I finally got my wits about me enough. I got my butt in the car and actually went to see a counselor. I didn't have to. I could have just waited it out. In fact, I contemplated that. Like, I'll just wait this out and they'll just have to fire me because I'll never show up again. So I cannot address it. But I got my butt in the car and I went. And very similar to Erin's experience, I got in to through EAP and I go in, nice lady, and I start unpacking that baggage. And she was a deer caught in the headlights and a little teary and didn't just, and so I'm like, oh, well, this is not going well. And she could not write that referral fast enough and push me out that door. Basically, she said the words clinical psychologist. And I thought, well, that's new. We don't have those. This could be bad. So I did. I went to a clinical psychologist. And our first visit was lots of questions, it was pretty in-depth. And she said something about displaying signs of post-traumatic stress disorder. And I was like, and I circle talked around it. And I said, yeah, I guess I can see where you're coming from, based on what I've told you. And she said, no, I am diagnosing you with PTSD. You have PTSD. This is a diagnosis, period. And I was like, well, that's rude. Why would you say that? You don't even know me. But then I'm thinking, in reflecting now, what I know now, I'm like, well, I don't really have to know somebody to diagnose them with a broken leg. Like, it's just a thing. You don't have to know me. You do your job. So she said, yeah, we're going to have a lot of visits. I think we're going to do a little thing called EMDR. It's the eye movement desensitization process. And I was like, I don't know what that voodoo is, but whatever. I thought you were going to give me some great drugs, but I guess we'll do this. She didn't give me any drugs. So the next thing that we did, I told her the whole story, and I had this movie that was playing over in my head over and over and over. I knew every medication, every intervention, I had it time stamped, every vital sign, and it was a movie that played on a loop in my head, and it never ever stopped, and I couldn't sleep. So I did get a prescription for what I'm pretty sure was horse tranquilizers from my primary care physician, and that would help me to fall asleep. But every single 24-hour cycle, time of death, I was awake and staring at the clock, whether I knew I was going to do it or not. It was just an automatic response. Time of death, I'm at a clock. And I couldn't stop this cycle. So the second visit that we had, we did a timeline, and I had to go over all of the events in my life from birth to that time of tragedies and bad events and things like that. So I'm laying this all out for her, family deaths and work-related deaths. And she wanted me to do like the big calls that I could remember, because we do so many. Like, I couldn't tell you how many pediatric arrests I had. They don't all stick in my mind, but there were certain ones that I did remember. So when we got done with that, and that took hours, I will tell you, she said, don't you find this, like, this isn't right? You know that this isn't normal. I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, all of this on this timeline, most people have one, and you have dozens, if not almost 100 events in here. Like, this is not good. I said, well, this is my life. This is everyone that I work with. The majority of these things that I just told you, I didn't know these people. And she said, yeah, but it still impacted you in a way, whether you realized it or not. She said, well, how is your whole profession not in here every day? Why do I not know all of you? And I went, well, it's because we don't believe in this stuff right now. So that was one thing that I went, wow, you need to talk to my friends, because some of them are way more broken than I am. So the next thing that we had to do was to go over the movie. And at this point, the movie is still playing in my head. I'm still not sleeping. I am self-medicating at a dangerous level just to feel okay in my own skin. And that self-medicating had been happening. That happened in that first 10-year period before the incident with my son, where I was not comfortable in my own skin, but I didn't know why. And I couldn't tell you why. But it just self-medicating, not so much, borderline on risky behavior, but self-destructive behaviors is what made me feel better. So I had to write out the movie, every single piece of the movie, every vital sign, everything that I remembered, which I think it would have probably been the best report that was ever written because I remembered every single thing. And that night I slept for the first time in weeks. So I continued to see her for a while, and I didn't end up having to do the EMDR because for me, writing is the equivalent of it. It was a form of therapy that I didn't know was even a form of therapy. It put everything out. We talked about it, and then it was put away. So when I look back and when I did that timeline, there were a couple of calls that really stuck out. And this, I want you to remember Andrea's definition of moral injury with the signs and the symptoms and the guilt and the shame. So I had, there were two calls that kept coming up during my session with with a clinical psychotherapist. One of them was I had a young boy, I think he was about 12 or 13, who had massive head trauma. And this was at a time in our careers when I started, everybody, it was load and go. You had a trauma, you load and go. Unless they were missing a head or something drastic, it was a load and go. And you worked the code on the way and you just did everything. So we were transitioning into the suite of protocols where we were calling not so obvious Ks or recent, like they just died, or termination on scene and all of this. When I got there, he was alive, tacky. And when I went to intubate him, it was an explosion of blood and he went straight into asystole. I personally, everything I had done in my life before is it wasn't my decision because it's a protocol, but I did not want to leave him. I wanted to load him up and I wanted to get the hell off that scene and get to the hospital and have somebody smarter than me take this over. So I called the hospital and what I was told was follow your protocol, period. In hindsight, it took me probably 3 days after that I was vomiting, crying, and I was sure that I had killed that kid single-handedly. Now we know I had nothing to do with that, but there was a moral injury that I didn't recognize as a moral injury. What I wanted to do and what my heart wanted to do was not in line with what I had to do. The other call that kept coming up was a little girl. She was either 5 or 6. She was riding on the front of a skid loader that her brother was driving. She fell off and the skid loader ran over her. She was alive when we got there, and it wasn't a grotesque injury. It was all internal injury. And she was so scared and gasping for breath. And my maternal instinct, I knew how this was going to end. There was no doubt. You do not get run over by a skid loader at age 5 or 6 and bounce back from that. The internal trauma was devastating. So what I wanted to do was to stroke her hair and hold her and tell her that we were trying to find her mom and, do the mom thing. But you can't do that when you need to intubate somebody and get the patches on him and do all of those things. So that was another one that in hindsight, that was a huge moral injury. My maternal instinct was up against my personal and my clinical hit each other again. And that was just devastating. So I never recognized those things for what they were. I never responded to them appropriately. I talked about them for a day and then I put them away and I compartmentalized and disassociated from that stuff. And I did that for years. And that got me to the point of being the mom who doesn't hug her kid because you're too clinical at the time. I mean, I still did mom stuff, but if you put me in a situation where I had to choose, I went clinical because there's no feels with the clinical. So I will say that now, after going through and doing my self-awareness is very high level now, and it sucked for a long time, but it's better. Still sucks sometimes, but there's things that I know now that I didn't know before. I know when I need to ask for help, and I do all the time, whether I need to talk to a friend, but usually I go to a counselor. I do not put that stuff on the back burner anymore. Professionals are the way to go. I don't participate in nonsense, and I say no to a lot of things because I put myself first now. Facebook, what? Nope, not going to read it. Don't care. And I'm also very bold in my advocacy work and speaking for those who can't speak for themselves. So whereas before I would have just stood in a room when I heard someone mock someone like, oh, so-and-so's got to go see a counselor because they had a bad call. And I probably would have just walked out of the room. Well, now that would never happen. Now I would say, you're an idiot. It's not 1950. Smarten up, you jackhole. And say something really sarcastic and mean. And I'm okay with that. And I'm at peace with that. But I wasn't like that in the beginning. And I guess my point is, I wish that I would have known before what I know now. I probably could have avoided maybe could have. I absolutely could have avoided a lot of the problems that I've caused in my family, and the shame and the guilt that I felt for not being the sister, mother, daughter, wife that I could have been or should have been, because I was so self-isolating that I built walls where I didn't necessarily need to be. And that's it.
Wow. Very powerful. Thank you, Chrissy. That was incredible. What an incredible story. So there is a QA box down at the bottom if you want to use that, or the chat box is being monitored. We've got Emily. Emily's up next. Emily, share your stories and turning points.
So I'm going to start out by saying something that is like an internal thing, and this is EMS too, right? My story is not as bad as Chrissy's. Right? Like, this is real though. This is what we do, right? We say, well, I can't really be hurting from this thing because my thing is not as bad as that person's thing, right? This is something that we do and we translate, and this goes through all of our existence. It's like that person, like, I can't be upset and worried about this pandemic, right? Because I'm privileged. I get to work from home. My husband and I kept our jobs, like these things.
Hierarchy of pain.
Exactly. It is not a contest.
No. And Emily, I just want to jump in on that. And what you just said about not as bad as, we had somebody that we know that had lost a child. It was a miscarriage, and said, because this is our EMS mentality, I know it's not as bad as when your niece passed away. And that struck me in a way like, what? Don't say that. Like, that anarchy of pain, and exactly what you said. Sorry, I just want to chime in that it is across the globe that we compare tragedy.
Yeah, and it's not. And then, like, if you still feel it, then there's guilt. Like, I shouldn't feel this way, and then it's like a cycle that we get into. And I can't believe we haven't said this disclaimer. Like, we are not behavioral health professionals on this. I also see a therapist.
Thank you. I forgot our disclaimer. Yes, this is
and someone put in a thing about how their moral injury and PTSD comes from an organizational culture. And I think that, Andrea, that's something that you have talked about on a couple of occasions. And I think I'm actually going to touch on that a little bit for my story. And my story is a little bit different. And you guys, I've figured out pretty much, I think that we all kind of come from the same general environment. But I did take a spin working as a paramedic in a different state for a different agency. And this is like the grass is not always greener kind of situation. So my story is, I was working for an agency. This was a hospital-based agency at the time. There were 75 employees in the ambulance division of this hospital system that owned 6 hospitals. So I want you to wrap your head around how many hospital employees there were. There were thousands and thousands of them, and there were 75 of us. So maybe the support and the follow-up on the ambulance division, as we were called, was maybe not the best that it could be. The people in leadership really did not understand the ambulance people that very much. And so I was in an environment that maybe wasn't as familial as I had come from. So, you know, I had worked at an agency for a while. I had a support system there. My family was here in Michigan, and I went to Minnesota to establish a relationship, which will also turn out to be a bad idea. But that is what I did. So I went to work, and we worked in a very specific county that was not by our base station. We actually had to drive through one county to get to our more rural county that we worked in. The call that I am going to talk a little bit about was a head-on collision on an interstate. A younger couple had gotten in an argument while driving one direction. The one person had grabbed the wheel of the car. It went across the center line and hit a carload of a mom and some kids. And the mom and the kids, the mom had gone to pick up her sister's kid because of some family emergency or whatever. And so 0 of the 4 children were properly restrained. She had done the best with what she had because she had, you know, moved her kids out of their seats into larger seats to put the littler kids into different seats. And so we had a 9-year-old in the passenger side of the vehicle, and then 3 kids, 6, 4, and 2, all improperly restrained in the back seat of this Honda Civic that took a head-on collision from a much larger vehicle. It was brutal. That's the best thing that I can say. It's not something that we were the first on scene with all of this going on. And before we even got to leave the younger couple, because of course they were not injured, their uncle had showed up, who was an attorney, and was in our faces already, like before we even got off the scene, because they were like local by the exit. And so if you want to talk about moral injuries, there was a whole boatload of them in that particular situation, right? We had a bad family situation, kids that were injured, people not restrained appropriately, people acting inappropriately in the environment that it was. And like that kid, the kid who ended up being the patient that I transported, like I have a lot of visual, Chrissy calls it the movie, you know, I have a lot of movie in my head that I could, you know, give you screen by screen of all of the things. And the only person who in the long run ended up surviving that accident was the 9-year-old in the front seat. Everybody else in that vehicle ended up dying. And it was also, remember, our whole staff was 75 people, right? And we had 5 patients, so every single one of our 911 trucks was there. So the entire fleet of our agency was there. And the environment in Minnesota, and Andrea and I actually talked about this earlier, it's different. It's not the same. Mutual aid is not the same. Everybody's service area is like almost like legislated is the best way I can describe it. It's very set in stone. So we were, I mean, like in essence, you took an entire county's EMS system and you took it 2 counties away to get to the trauma center. And then we all had to go back to work. So, because what else are you going to do when there's, you know, 10 of the 75 people who work there that have all experienced this particular traumatic incident? So that's kind of the backstory of it. So in the environment that I was in a relatively new relationship with a person who was not at all supportive of my role in EMS. He had a very difficult time with my relationship with any of my coworkers, because we know that, you know, we can't have friends that are of the opposite gender. And like, if you're not in EMS, they have a really hard time with that. And so I was not establishing relationships the way that I should have to have support from my coworkers in this particular environment. And the person that I was engaged to was not being very supportive of me seeking any sort of assistance because he didn't think that I should have to talk to anybody but him about it. So it was a really traumatic time. I ended up in a pretty bad place. I didn't engage in very many things. I ended up in kind of a little tailspin, and there was the fire department actually who was on that call with us ended up they had a person like a critical incident professional come in, and she talked to us all, and we had, a debriefing, and it must not have been a debriefing because it was too long after the fact, right? A debriefing has to be within so many hours, but some sort of event where we could all discuss it and we talked about the things. And after the fact, she was just like, you didn't share anything and blah, blah, blah. And I was like, I should be able to handle this. Like, I have handled all of these things before. This is not like, this is terrible. Like, this is tragic, and it was terrible, but I should be able to do this. Like, this is my job. My job is to be able to handle these things that nobody else can. And she looked at me and she said, why do you think that you are going to be able to handle this thing that no one could have ever imagined happening? And it was what I needed to hear at that particular point in time. Like, why did I think that I could do it? And so in that moment, it was like right around my 30th birthday, and there was like a really big blow up at my house as well. And I said, you know what, this isn't right. I left, right? So I packed up the relationship. I called off the wedding. I packed up my stuff and I came home. I came back to Michigan. I moved back in with my parents, and I did like this part-time thing for a little while where I like dabbled in EMS, and I was like, it's fine. I'm fine. Everything is fine. Clearly I've gotten over this, right? I've gotten over this. It's all good. And then they sentenced the people who crossed the center line and killed all these kids, and they got probation for 6 months. And I went right down the same path again, right? This is the injustice piece of the moral injury that Andrea was talking about earlier. So I thought, I was like, I packed it up. I packed up my whole life there. I packed up all of the issues that I had, and the manipulative relationship, and the not great in situation I was in, and I packed it up and I left it. So I was like, it should be fine. This is why I say it doesn't go away, right? Like, it is still there, and you don't know when it's going to come back. It's, for me, in that particular situation, it was when one of the other guys who was working that day called me and said, have you seen the news? Of course I hadn't seen it because I didn't live in Minnesota anymore, right? And I certainly wasn't following it because I put it away. I was done with it. So when he called me and told me about it, and I was just like, here it all came back. It came back. So I had to actually deal with it. And good, bad, or indifferent, I did not go to EAP. I did not talk to EAP. I talked to friends, I talked to family. I do have, currently to this very day, I have a mental health professional that I talk about things with, because even though I'm not experiencing the trauma that you guys are every day anymore, 17 years of it, when you don't deal with it at all, when it comes back, you have to have these coping mechanisms. Because even getting ready for this tonight, my heart rate is increased. I'm talking faster than I should be, etc. Because of talking about this is hard, because part of me thinks that everything, I should have never done that, right? Like, I can put all of the blame back on myself, because we're also really good at this. Because if I had never made the poor decision to go to Minnesota in the first place, I never would have had any of those experiences. And so I had to get tools to not get into that cycle of I should have controlled that. All of this should have been under my control. We don't control the universe, turns out. And this is a broad stroke. Most people in EMS think they control the universe, or at least they try really hard to control the universe, because we are put into situations where we are expected to control things that are not normally controllable, right? Humans and their emergencies, and we are the constant and the rock, and we don't let other people's emergencies become our emergencies, and that's what we're trained to do. And it doesn't take very long before we're putting ourselves into a situation where none of this, I should have controlled for that. Like I should have noticed that person was going down that path. I should have been able to convince that person to not make that decision. So I just want for you guys, like what your takeaway is on this. I think, one, surround yourself and maintain relationships with people who will support you. Find yourself your tribe who will look at you and say, hey, Emily, you should not do that. Like, this is not a good idea. When I was there and I was waking up every morning and my conversation with myself was, I can do this. I can do this. I can totally wake up every morning and be in this situation and I will survive and it will be fine. I will be fine if I just keep doing it over and over and over again and convincing myself. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. And you need someone who's looking out for you and saying, no, just because you can doesn't mean that's the right thing to do. And if you have to force it in that particular way, maybe it's not the right choice. So put yourself in a group of individuals that will question you when you need to be questioned, people who will notice when things are going poorly, and they will say, hey, maybe you shouldn't do that one more thing. Maybe you shouldn't make that poor decision. And then make sure that those people are not people who blame you. So there's a difference between someone who sees something wrong with you and places blame on you for it, and someone who sees something wrong with you and offers you assistance. So know who those people are. I used to say to my new employees and trainees at work, be careful who you hitch your wagon to. And that goes personally and professionally. This is a hard job that you have chosen, because literally it is a choice. And if anybody says you have to keep doing it, they're wrong. You are choosing to do this. You're choosing to invest your time, your energy, so many tears into a job that sometimes you don't get a whole lot of gratitude out of. It's an intrinsic motivation. So, surround yourselves with people who understand that, and they will support you in whatever it is that you actually need, not maybe desire, right? That's a different thing. If you need to be told, you should probably talk to someone. I in my personal behavioral health quest, my therapy sessions increased and didn't decrease with need. And that should make sense to you. It's like I titrate them to effect, right? So you can go as long as a month or 6 weeks, and then you'll get 3 weeks out and there will be this crisis that's going on. And you're like, I really need to talk to someone about this. Okay, it's time for me to kind of turn those back up. If you don't, I'm going to take a minute and plug Stay Well. If we do have people on this call and this webinar that are volunteers and are paid on call, and you don't have health insurance, et cetera, that covers this kind of thing, we are really fortunate right now to have the Stay Well line and the support groups that go with it. So we have a free ability to do over the phone therapy with a Stay Well counselor. There's some chat support that you can get if you don't like to talk on the phone. And there are support groups that meet too. So I know that Ryan knows these things too, and he's going to talk in a minute, but I just had to take a minute to say, this is a really great one of the very few great things that have come out of this pandemic is that we've been able to support behavioral health resources for our first responders and frontline folks. So yeah, I've been rambling for a while. Matt put the link in the chat in case you see that. But if you have any questions or whatever, and I'm going to say that, like, if you, I mean, you know now who I am in our state office. And if you're struggling or you get stuck or you want somebody to talk to, I'm here. My cell phone is on our website. You can totally call it. And I will talk to you about whatever it is. And because if you need a support, I will gladly be there for you, because that's kind of our job. So thanks for listening to my terrible rambling story.
Thank you, Emily. That's really kind of you. Greatly appreciated. That was an incredible story. So now we're going to move into Ryan. Ryan Chatterton, introduce yourself and share your story and turning point.
Yeah, sure. Before I go on, I just want to kind of add on a little bit to what Emily was saying. You know, she's talked about adding or making sure you're surrounded by people that'll support you and do all this. But another kind of, if you look at the reverse side, is be that person that somebody can also rely on for some of those things. You know, it'll kind of make sense in my story here in a moment, but a lot of things that came out of this is that us as first responders are really good at believing that our secondary trauma, our moral injury, it can't be as bad as some of the people we treat, some of the people we see every day. So that's kind of why we push some of those things aside. That goes back to that hierarchy of pain that Emily kind of started on. Why should I reach out for help? I'm the one supposed to be helping somebody else. Okay, so in that mindset, if you recognize a coworker, if you recognize a family worker, you maybe see some of these signs of this secondary trauma, this moral injury, be that person they can rely on. Be that person that maybe annoys them a little too much to try to seek out some additional help if you can help it. You know, be that person to say, you know, plug the Stay Well line, or plug some of these other resources for people, because sometimes it takes that one person, that squeaky wheel, that you just go, fine, all right, I'll go do this, and it can lead somebody down a better path or some of that. So my name is Ryan Chatterton. It's my 11th year in EMS as a paramedic. I work in the kind of Southeast Michigan for a large agency. Done all kinds of stuff. Again, paramedic on the road. Currently, I'm actually in education. I'm an IC. I dabbled really quickly in critical care, do a lot of like community paramedic work. But my story is going to be a little bit different than what Aaron and Chrissy and kind of Emily spoke about, is that kind of has some EMS sides to it, but this is definitely something that happened very recently, you know, last year during COVID, kind of everything else like that. This is where a lot of this started to kind of take place. And so actually I was put in touch with Andrea like in January, when a lot of these things that have already taken place, and they're like, oh, this is a kind of a perfect fit for kind of some of the things we're doing. And again, a lot of mine goes into the idea that, you know, what I'm experiencing can't be as bad as what other people are experiencing. You know, I had a lot of great things going on. You know, things look good for me, but I kept experiencing these things throughout this year, and I refused to recognize them, you know, for various reasons. But that's kind of how my story starts. So go back almost a year ago now. Okay, almost a year ago. We knew COVID was coming. I'd actually done a lot because I worked full-time in education, but I still pick up on the road. I pick up shifts, try to keep my skills fresh a little bit. Again, I'm doing a lot of like community paramedic work. So I was doing a lot with that. So in March, when we kind of heard that COVID was coming to Michigan, started seeing cases, I started picking up in some of our multiple areas around our company, you know, making sure that one, I knew kind of what the local protocols were in each of these different areas, in case I needed to help out for whatever reason, because I just had one of those feelings that I think our industry is about to get overwhelmed by a bunch of stuff. So kind of preparing myself. So working shifts, you know, end of March through April. And then kind of towards the end of April, I got a phone call from my boss. Again, I worked in education at the time, that basically says, we're furloughing the entire department, yourself included. I'm like, oh, okay, didn't really see that coming, but sure. But he kind of said, you know, you have a certain set of skills, we need certain people. They're looking to fill one of the roles that were open on the road. We just need you to fill that. And I'm like, oh, well, that's neat. I'm, you know, maybe not working in education, but at least I'm still working. You know, I'm still going to be full time, going back to the road. So I was like, oh, all right, okay with that. I have a 3-year-old. He was 2 at the time. We just bought a house, so it's just like one of those, like, well, that was very scary. You know, the thought of losing my job, not being able to support this 2-year-old. You know, my family, what are we gonna do about mortgages, groceries, things like that. But I was like, I got lucky. Like, I got very lucky compared to everybody else in my department that got laid off, essentially. I'm like, okay. So ended up on midnights, which was, you know, not ideal for what I was doing. But again, that whole idea of, well, I'm working and they're not. So, you know, who am I to complain? So fast forward maybe a week. I'd been working on the road for about a week at that point, full time, when a friend of mine called and said, hey, this office at the state level is looking to fill this role. They're looking to fill it very, very quickly. Are you interested? They're not even putting it out, to just saying, hey, do you know anybody? I was like, yeah, I could be interested with that. So didn't really know it involved. So got in contact with the person, kind of talked to them a little bit. They're like, you know, you have really good recommendations. I was like, yeah, I know people. And ended up getting this job where I worked as a consultant, I guess, trying to put together mental health resources. And they kind of designated me the representative for healthcare and first responders. So it was my job to locate these resources for healthcare workers, you know, in the hospital, fire, EMS, police, corrections, you name it, any first responder, any of the lines. I was locate resources, try to find connections, to try to promote some of these things and help to develop this help center, and develop all these things to help first responders. And I'm like, okay. And it doesn't help to say that I was paid incredibly well for my services to be able to do that. So now all of a sudden I'm thinking, all right, I'm working on the road. I have a secondary job that's paying me very well. I'm like, I hate to say that, you know, things kind of line up for you, but when you're watching all these terrible things happen, you got to remember this was like May of last year. You know, hospitals were starting to come to capacity. They're creating all these field units, all kind of different sites around the state, you know, expecting, you see all these deaths occurring. I'm like, you know, bad things are happening in the world right now. And I'm getting pretty lucky. I have 2 very well-paying jobs at this point, and I'm like, cool. And I felt that my role, my secondary role at the state office was, you know, doing some good stuff. You know, it's my job to try to help people that are experiencing some pretty bad things. You know, this was from, you know, testing to childcare, you know, finding all these things to help with first responders. Because I remember going back a year, everything was shut down. Everything was shut down. So, you know, I really kind of dove headfirst into all the stuff to try to get all these resources together. So I did that. I was on the roll only for about a month when we were called back in to try to restart our classes or figure out a way to restart everything online. Okay, there's no more in-person classes. Everything had to be online. And I was traditionally a teacher that taught in person. So, you know, trying to figure out how to do that. Then you had to come up with, well, numbers wise, how many people are allowed into class? You know, what does it look like coming back to class? How am I going to take all my curriculum, put it into an online format that these students have been not in an online format for 7-8 months? You know, how are we going to do that and still be able to see some success? So I spent a lot of the summer trying to redevelop curriculum and try to change some things, but also I started kind of building up all these little things, kind of built up all these little stressors of, you know, I don't want to let people down. I want to make sure that people are getting help because I'm the only person that's going to bring this help to them. You know, how am I going to ensure that my students are successful? You know, how is this curriculum going to translate? You know, how do I make it easy for these guys? So a lot of things kind of started piling up. And, you know, that's not even including things that were kind of before COVID that, you know, still little stressors here and there that I had to deal with and that we all kind of have to deal with. So little by little, all these stressors kind of, I noticed myself, and you talk about the moral injury and some of those signs and symptoms, that it wasn't until way later that you kind of recognize. But looking back, you know, I started to isolate away a little bit. I didn't really want to play with my son because, you know, I was stressed out about things. I was not sleeping well. I had little motivation to do things. I knew what I had to do, but I just sit there in front of the computer and be like, I don't really want to do it. I know I have to do it, but I don't want to do it. So I started noticing all these little things. And, you know, holidays were kind of weird. I just kind of, you know, isolate. I'd go sit in the other room, just kind of hanging out by myself. It just weird little things happen. Then two really big events occurred that kind of really shaped everything, at least for me, and kind of started putting a lot of things in place. My wife is very much a family person. She talked to her mom, dad every night, talked to a lot of her siblings. She's like the youngest of 11. So she talked to her siblings all the time. We got I think it was after Halloween, maybe. It was on a Saturday. I was out in our garage because it was getting a little bit colder. I was just playing with my son. We had a TV in the garage. I had the Michigan game on. Of course, they did very poorly. So I kind of really wasn't paying much attention. The game was over. I was just kind of hanging out with William. We were just doing whatever. We might have had a picnic on his table or something like that. Then my wife kind of came out in the garage. She sat on the step and she was crying. And I'm like, okay. And she couldn't really say anything. And she handed me her phone. There's a text that said that my brother-in-law had passed away. Very, very unexpected. He was a little bit older than me, but still fairly young. Had no idea what was going on. And of course, it's one of those things where us at EMS, we know kind of an instinct kicks on that says, okay, I need to be the one that's going to take care of my wife. I'm like, okay, so I have to be the strong one. Come to find out, it's a very, very traumatic thing. He was by himself and he choked to death. Called 911, couldn't talk, found him unresponsive, tried to resuscitate him, couldn't do it. So, you start thinking, could have something else been done? Fast forward a month, we had just taken a vacation. And again, it was very close to her family. I dropped William off, my son, to his daycare. Just gotten home. I got a phone call from my sister-in-law, and it basically said, I answered, said, hey, and she just goes, Dad died. I'm like, what? She goes, Dad's dead. He's dead. What do I do? I'm like, what do you mean? What's going on? And so she kind of explained that my father-in-law passed away. She tried to call my wife. My wife was getting ready for work, so she had no idea. So probably the biggest thing I ever feared in my life was telling my wife that one of her parents had passed away, and I had to do that. And for me, it was like I was breaking down, but I was trying not to, because I'm trying to support everybody. Be that person that helps everybody else. Again, all these other signs you saw building up. I didn't really have a lot of. I didn't want to do some of the jobs anymore. I felt kind of burnt out by different things, that the helping with the mental health resources, I really felt it slipping. And I got to the point around Christmas time that I was like, I need to focus on something. I go, something's not right. I'm not feeling good. I'm kind of, avoiding my family. I don't feel good. It's time for me to let go and let somebody else deal with these kind of things. So I actually stepped away from several of these jobs that were very well paying. And I just said, I can't do it anymore. As much as I love it, as much as I loved a lot of things, I just have to step away. I go, there's too much going on with my life right now that I need to focus on what's important. And at that time, it was my family. And I had that's where I had to, kind of put my focus. And so that's what I did. I stepped away from a lot of things that I loved doing, that treated me well, that paid me well, so I could kind of focus more on myself. And there's a point you kind of felt like a hypocrite that you're putting together all these mental health resources and you're not utilizing them, because again, why are we asking for help? We should be the one helping people. So I'll kind of end with my nephew actually kind of posted something online this weekend that I thought was kind of leading up into this. And he kind of said that having a weakness isn't a problem. It's having a weakness and not asking for help is the problem. And I'm going to leave that one.
Oh, thanks, Ryan. That was a really, really great story and turning point. And it just reminds me of healthy boundaries. Like you set a boundary, and once you were protecting yourself, you walked away for a bit. So good for you. So we have Betsy Mcdavid up next. Betsy, if you want to introduce yourself, welcome. Thanks for being so patient with us.
Whatever. So I'm Betsy Mcdavid, and I'm a quality supervisor at a fairly big agency in southeastern Michigan, that who shall not be named. And I know everybody here, and I'm going to throw out a disclaimer right now that this is social media Betsy. This is not what Betsy looked like 3 hours ago. Okay? No makeup on, really rough. I did doll it up a little bit for this. Just because I'm like, it's being recorded. What? It's going to come back and haunt me. So I could tell a very similar story that you've already heard tonight, and I don't know that that's not, none of us, I want to clarify, none of us were not looking for martyrdom. That's a hard word for me, martyrdom. And we're not saints. We're not looking for sympathy. We're not looking for pity. We are looking to make this a normal conversation, and I'm not afraid to talk to anybody about anything, anywhere. I will throw myself out there and be the fool. I don't really care. Like, no shame. Second thing is, I'm still in it. I still do terrible. I still have terrible coping mechanisms. I'm not on the other side. I'm still working on it. I see a mental health professional. I was actually kind of a highlight of my day today in the office. Yes, it's an office, so you might not be able to relate to that. I've been in the office for about 5 years. We'll get to that in a little bit. But one of the highlights of my day today was to talk about mental health to somebody who has been a paramedic for 30 years, who would never consider talking about mental health to anybody. And it was a good conversation. I'm glad that I brought it up and that I'm comfortable enough to bring it up. And I'm super happy that I throw that out there, and the employees that work for my agency know that they can come talk to me, and I'm not gonna shame them or make them feel like they're not enough or anything like that. I'm like, look how much time, 8 minutes. Okay, I got this. And that's a very important thing. How I got here, and what the thing that sticks out to me most was, my God, I got this job in the office 5 years ago, and I lost my armor. I had this best armor of anybody. I could go to any terrible call. I could see any horrific thing, child abuse, anything. And we grew up in this suck it up, buttercup. You just dust it off and go on to the next. And that is the culture that existed in this EMS agency that I grew up in. And then I got in this role and I did less calls, and I'm like, all of a sudden, water falls. I'm crying all over. Emily, what's the worst thing you've ever seen? Yes, I can still flash back and still have that PTSD of what a child who was so neglected and had their toes chewed off because they were left alone in a crib because a pet rat chewed their toes off. Yeah, that's really fresh in my brain. I can play that movie anytime you ask for it. But now my superpower is empathy. I didn't know it, but being in this office, I will read a report and I'm like, oh my God, they went through that. Oh my God. And it was over the weekend, and I didn't know it, and I didn't help them. And they had to just keep going call after call. And I see that they went on call after call. And I'm like, oh. So I'm a Monday through Friday girl. So if it happens, I have the luxury of being in quality and not operations. So when I hear of something horrific going out, I'm like, they're out of service. Take them out now. I'm going to take them home, or take them to their support system, or do whatever it is they need. It's really not popular with operations supervisors. Really not popular. I don't care. Because it's something that we never had the opportunity to. I remember being shell shocked and going on call after call and not wanting to put a burden on anybody else, and just doing it. And I'm like, we can't keep doing this. This is not good. This is not normal. This is like after reading The Body Keeps the Score, I'm like, this is like a concussion. If we know that you can't do this in football, why the hell are we still doing it in EMS? Get back in the game, take another hit. You can do it. No, that's not how anybody survives this. I mean, not only do we want people to survive, we'd like people to actually thrive. You're giving a lot in your life. You're giving all. So we need to learn to not take all and let you keep some for yourself, and model that. and model that by not acting like people are saints who work the equivalent of 2 full-time jobs and destroy themselves and their compassion and their minds. We need to not normalize that. It's not cool to work. It's not cool to work 120 hours a week. That's not cool. And it is cool to talk about, hey, you know, I see a counselor. I went through a couple of EAP people. It didn't really work out well for me, but I found this counselor, and she used to be a medic. And oh my God, I found the Holy Grail. She used to be a medic. It's amazing. I refer her out all the time, even though I'm like, I don't care how much money it costs. Take care of yourself. Don't get your nails done. Talk to a professional. Do something that really matters. It's like not, you know, like, oh, I'll get a massage and I'll do this and I'll go on a
Or
vacation.
get your nails done and go to the professional appointment.
Okay, as long as you're willing to do both. As long as you're willing to do both. But I only have a couple of minutes left, and what I know best in life is that not doing something about something never fixes anything. And God knows the industry is not going to fix this for us. So I'm like, where am I at? I don't like taking no for an answer. And what can I have? What can I work out? What can I make happen? And so I recently pitched the CRT team. And I'm like, we like our teams. We like fancy, we like different outfits. We like to just, you know, be special. So CRT, it stands for Crisis Relief Team. This hasn't happened yet, but it's going to happen. It's not an if, it's a when. A crisis response team. One thing I know about EMS people is we take care of our own, especially if one of our own is brave enough to wave a white flag and say, I'm tapping out. You know, because we all know how horrible it is to have that moral injury call or something that just strikes home and strikes a chord, and it's just horrible. And then to be like, yeah, you got another one coming out. I remember being in Speedway once after a particularly horrible call, and some jackwagon was a total jerk to me. And I'm like, I raged. I wanted to pick up a display and split his head open and eviscerate him. Like you have no idea the kind of rage that's what comes out of me. And I'm like, I don't want to rage. I don't want to kill people. What do I do? So I thought it would be nice to be able to have a break after those kinds of calls, because first of all, you don't know if you're going to get another one. And with all this cortisol in your frontal lobe, you're not going to give a quality care. Your brain does not work well high on cortisol or blurred by cortisol. Second of all, we need to take time to recoup and decompress. And obviously this industry, especially is the way staffing is right now, it's not like we can just let everybody go home after a rough call. That's not the way it is. For one, we care too much and we don't want to burden everybody else on. For two, there's a stigma, and the supervisor will probably act like you're a piece of crap for doing it. So what's a solution? Well, I think EMS will take care of themselves. So what I'm working on is a crisis relief team that comes in for a short period of time. They can volunteer to do more. They can do a whole shift. They can cover somebody completely, but at least 4 hours, at least 4 hours. Now, mind you, there are a lot of things I haven't worked out yet. Like what is an acceptable call? Because a BLS transfer should not be a moral injury and should not be something that traumatizes you so much that you can't go on for the day. That does not mean that there aren't certain situations. So I'm thinking there's going to be an intake panel that will deal with that. But I would be willing to work and put myself on call for 12 hours a month to come, or 4 hours here and there, a few spots on the schedule. If somebody has a crisis and deals with this terrible call, to come in and give them a little relief. Absolutely. And most of us would have been like, hallelujah, thank you, Lord. I'm not even religious. I do not have, I get to take a break and just like work through it. And there are a lot of other moving parts and pieces. My hope, my goal is to make this successful, find out what works and what doesn't work, and to spread it like wildfire to every other agency that's out there, so they can mirror it, copy it, find out what works for them. I just know that the industry isn't, in my company, any company isn't going to do it on their own. So how do we take care of each other? That's where I'm at right now. And thank you for everybody for your stories. This is my tribe, and we don't even talk about this stuff with each other. That's how uncomfortable this is. Like, yeah, we heard things from each other tonight that we will not talk about. Maybe bits and pieces, but kudos and love to all of you for sticking your neck out, because this is not easy. And we can do hard things. We already know we've been doing hard things. So we can do the hard things of talking about it and making people feel more comfortable and putting ourselves out there so nobody feels alone.
Thank you,
That's
Betsy. And we can all blow Betsy kiss back. So that was incredible. Thank you for sharing that. The CR team, it sounds incredible. You'll have to keep us updated on how that turns out and develops and all that good stuff. So it is 7:34. So what we're going to do now is just open up the floor for Q&A. So if you want to, stay on, ask some questions. I do have one question in the box. It's more of a story. If you need to hop off, you're fine to hop off if you have to. We totally understand. Yes, you did earn 1.5 CE credits and you were here until 7:30, and we appreciate that. Those of you that are staying on, I'm going to read this first Q&A, and we can open it up to the panel to kind of make some comments. And you guys can open this on your end under the Q&A box. So I have the opposite issue. So this was I think this was earlier in the evening. So I'll read it and we can kind of break it down. But it says, I have the opposite issue. I have been required to report to work every day for the last 13 months during COVID. I'm a teacher in the prison and have not had students or anything else to do. My coworkers and I go to work to sit at our desks and twiddle our thumbs all day. This has been very hard on every one of us. We all have been self-medicating to deal with the insanity. So yeah, and when you say every day, I'm thinking you mean like literally every day, right? So that's pretty extreme in itself. So anybody on the panel too, go ahead and unmic yourself if you want to just kind of contribute to that or have any commentary. But I would say the self-medicating to deal with insanity, yeah, I mean, coping strategy. I think the first thing that we talked about is just recognize it and going, hey, I'm self-medicating, right? That's the first step. So we're already there. So then it just goes from there with you. So again, I'm towing the line here because I'm not giving out. I'm not a professional.
We're not healthcare professional. We're not behavioral health professionals. I will say, I think that, right? I know I'm so good at this. I'm just, I've done such a great job with my own life. So what I will say about what that person said is that there's like the underlying, I have the opposite issue, and it doesn't, that is an issue, right? Like, and we don't know enough about the particular situation to give advice as to how to get through it, but recognize that is not sitting and doing nothing for 12 hours a day, however many days a week, and how many days in a row. That's not normal, and your brain's not meant for that. It's really not. It's like the complete opposite of like the overstimulus. Understimulus isn't good for you either, especially when you are a person who is obviously, I would assume, relatively mission driven if you're educating inside a prison system. So, I mean, I'm going to say kudos to you for recognizing that that's a particular situation. And I am sure that a better trained person than myself would be able to offer you some sort of like brain exercises or something to help cope with that. That does not involve self-medicating. Although Aaron's self-medicating of cortisol with lifting heavy things, that's a pretty good idea, because at least it's good for your body. At least it's good for your body. So, but it's true that like your issue, kind of like what we talked about a long time ago in this presentation, your issue is your issue, and that's okay. It doesn't matter if it's, you know, some people will say, oh, well, I would do anything to be able to do that. But there's different things in every single situation. And, you know, doing the grass is always greener thing, like it's not cool and it's not helpful. That comparison, like there's nobody to compare yourself to. Just put that away, put it away. So don't feel like you can't be having a crisis, because that's the thing. And like, I can't even tell you, and this is the same for all of everyone in our office's license. And it has been a thing constantly where it's just like, when we went home from work and went to work from home, it was kind of traumatic for all of us, because we were paramedics. And what do paramedics do when something is going down the tubes? It's not go home. It's not go home. And that's what we did.
Rush in. It's normally
exactly.
rush in.
The complete
Not retreat,
opposite.
not retreat, retreat.
But we couldn't, that was not a choice like that. I mean, we have been working not as much hours as EMS does, but a lot of hours on all of this. And we couldn't just drop the EMS office and go work with our people, because we had to, you know, do protocols and make sure people got their licenses and do all of those things that have to still happen. So I guess to our commenter is, I guess I feel you. We get it, and that stinks.
By the way, does anybody else notice Emily's camera is off?
That's
Kristine, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Yeah,
but
you just
Yeah.
froze. That's all.
My Zoom has gone like gray across my screen. So,
Oh, okay.
we'll see if it comes back.
I'd like to give one bit of advice. I have a lot of advice. Doesn't mean it's good. But this is something that I've heard from a mental health professional and on a regular basis. And Emily alluded to it earlier tonight. And then I kind of put my own flair on it. That's not helpful. So when you talk about yourself, like, I should be fine because they're putting up with it and they're dealing with it. You know, I could do this. That wasn't that bad, or this is fine. That kind of talk, or bad talk about yourself, like, what is wrong with you? God, you're falling apart. Why are you crying about this? That is not helpful. Do not do it. So my one bit of advice is talk to yourself like you would a small child that you love. Or your dog or cat. The way I talk to my dog, that's the way I have to talk to myself now. And I'm like, oh my goodness. But be kind to yourself. You've given a lot. It takes a toll. Do not have that negative talk. Talk to yourself like you would a cute little puppy.
Yeah, that's great advice. I actually recently was told that, and I tried it, which is really hard to do. But it's interesting, when I started giving myself grace, I was more likely to give others grace. And the other thing is, it takes the pressure off, right? It kind of just automatically takes that pressure off you. So I think that's super great advice. And if I can chime in really quickly, because Betsy inspired me, inspired a thought as well, is find your thing. So like for me, it's writing. So many times after a shift, I would come home and I would write. And I would write about the call, and I would put it into, you know, I would blog and then really perfect it. And I would cry while I'm writing, because it was an outlet for me where it was almost like I was talking to someone about it. And so for me, that's an outlet. And for Aaron, like that outlet was, you know, exercise. And we all find it might be family. It could be a lot of those different things. It could be riding your motorcycle responsibly, right? Or it could be something like that. But find your thing that really helps center you and give you relief and connects you to something bigger than yourself.
I would just like to add something.
Yeah.
So I went from, you know, high volume, high hour, productivity driven work environment to an environment where employee alertness and ability to perform their job at a high level is the focus. And so my industry now where I work in, they don't want us working every day. They want us rested and well prepared so that we can perform at a very high level. And as such, my work-life balance has changed dramatically. I went from, 50, 60-hour work weeks to 20-something hour work weeks. And usually only a couple days a week am I actually pumping a heart case. Other days I'm backing up and helping and doing that sort of thing. So that dramatically improved my quality of life. If you have vacation time, use your vacation time. If you can take personal days at work, take your personal days at work. It's crazy how much better you'll feel if you're not going to work all the time. And when you're at work, you're not busy constantly with the highest stress stuff. And if your employer or your work environment can't provide that for you, just built into your schedule, then you need to use the benefits that you're earning as an employee. Instead of just cashing out your vacation time, find a 3-day weekend, right? You got Memorial Day coming up, you get a 3-day weekend, use a day, one vacation day, you got a 4-day weekend, go on a little trip. You got to take your personal time away from work. It made a huge difference in my general attitude, my energy levels, my just happiness to be at work. So that's what I would suggest is take your time away.
Wouldn't you say, Aaron, that creates longevity too? Like, don't you feel?
Oh yeah, I like going to work. I like.
Don't be afraid to walk away. Take-away message, don't be afraid to walk away when you know.
Been a few days, yeah. It's,
I mean, you can do that for, 15, 30 years if you have balance, but you can burn out an employee in 2 years if they're just constantly at work and feeling like they have to pick up that shift and pick up that burden. And our employers, a lot of them are rewarding that. Thank you so much for working 150 hours this week. You helped us out. And it's like, they're going to be gone in a year because they've worked themselves to death. They're going to have health problems.
Works to pay your bills so you can live your life. If you
true, yeah, and that's an issue too.
Yeah. Yep. Nobody wants to die with their PTO bank full.
Your whole life is hard.
Nope.
Or when you only get 4 days of PTO, you started a new agency. I've been in that position. I had 4 days of PTO. So yeah, I didn't want to dip into it. I don't have any PTO. That's it for the entire year. That's insane. So yeah.
So everybody has been here 15 minutes over and they deserve to see a cute dog. This is Mojo. He's my last child.
Hi, Mojo. Hi, buddy.
He looks like a baby, but he's 7 years old.
He's still a baby.
He smells like a dirty corn chip.
Well, what I can do, so Victoria and Danielle have been really gracious. So let's send a shout out to Victoria and Danielle. They've stayed on the whole time on the back end. We had 0 issues and I super, super greatly appreciate them. At this point, we can stop streaming live to Facebook. And Danielle and Victoria, thank you so much. And you are just free to fly and do whatever you want.
I was feeling pretty good about, there's only 27, 28 people here. That's not that bad. Then you were like, it's also live on Facebook. And I'm like,
but we are no longer live.
Maybe that's